This is one chapter of it called White Privilege, Chapter 22. Bagram, 2014. We run through the dusty streets of Bagram Airfield. This is deployed to Afghanistan. Tom Young's legs eating up the ground beside me, easily keeping the pace I've been pushing us at for nearly 8 miles this morning. I've been trying to tell myself we're only friends, but in the past few weeks, I can feel myself softening when I'm around him, telling him everything about me without the usual careful calculation about what I think people cannot handle. For some reason, I'm not scared of scaring him away. He just keeps running along beside me, listening to my stories without judgment, without wanting me to be anyone other than who I already am, sometimes cocking his head in an adorable way, as though physically trying to see an idea from a different point of view. This wasn't at all part of my plan, certainly not my professional goals. But by the time I realize I'm in love with him, there's no help for it. Where do you think you'll end up after all this? He asks me, referring to our future freedom in our imagined lives after the army, in the way we all did. Some distant and ill-defined unknown, but something we knew we each dreamed of. It reminds me of being a kid in the cult, huddled up with Michaela, talking about the real world, the outside, the system, where anything can happen, where you can make any choice you want, be who you want to be. Be who you want to be, outside of the familiar womb of the group. I don't know where I'll live, I say. I don't know if I'll ever live anywhere permanently. I'm like that with places and relationships. I trail off, looking at him through the side of my eyes, but he holds his pace without a hitch. I move on. It's why the army works for me. I don't know how much longer I'll stay in the army, but I know it will only be a few years at best, until I figure out what I want to be when I grow up. Tom is on his 15th year already. I know he's committed and will stay until he reaches 20 years and can retire on half pay. I have to live in a city with a major international airport, I say. That's literally my only requirement. And don't say Nashville has an international airport, like the people at Fort Campbell always do. That's BS. I mean somewhere where I can get on a single flight and be in another country in a few hours. I know that basically leaves me New York, DC, Dallas, or Atlanta. But the South is not for me, and New York City is way too cold to even pretend I'd survive there. But let's face it, as an ex-intelligence officer, I'll likely be headed to the Capitol to work for one of the 3-letter agencies. That's all our well-known slang for CIA, DIA, NSA, and all the myriad other agencies that I could choose from as a trained, war-minted officer with a top-secret clearance. I've thought about joining the force or other units that do cooler things than we do here that would send me abroad, anywhere other than here. Have you ever considered Seattle? Tom asks after a thoughtful moment. I'm not sure I've ever thought about Seattle other than that time in the car with Nina at the Border Patrol stop. And I think there's a Meg Ryan movie about the place, and that's about the extent of what I know. And I know it's where Tom's from. I'm trying not to, but I can't help but feel like we somehow belong to each other already, and that together we could make it through anything. I find myself wondering if I could let myself know someone that deeply, let him know me that deeply, without reservations. If I could trust that he would see something beautiful inside this old vampire's soul. And we have been married for almost 10 years. I'm trying not to. Oh, I read that part. Later, I'm at work in the Tactical Operations Center, where the operations and intelligence cells work side by side. Our days are usually filled with innocuous banter, but for some reason, the conversation has turned serious today. Come on, ma'am, my friend, Chief Warrant Officer 3, Andrew Sims, says with his loud, booming voice. You of all people know there's no such thing as white privilege. Several of the Lieutenant Mafia, sensing a good debate about to commence, wander over. What do you mean by white privilege? It's not a term I'm familiar with, but I can already sense I'm about to disagree with whatever Sims says next. You know, he says, this ridiculous idea that somehow, because we are white people, we had a leg up in life and never had to work hard for anything. I mean, I came from nothing. I joined the Army at 17 as an infantry ground pounder, and I pulled myself up from there, literally, by my bootlaces. I was always ready. I always had a bag packed. I was given opportunities because I worked hard. You know what I mean. You came from worse than I did. I am silent for a long moment, feeling eerily similar to the way I'd felt in Miss Mill's high school classroom when she'd said that missionaries were agents of imperialism. And even though I didn't yet understand all the details, I knew in my bones that it was true. I know that he's worked his butt off to change his stars, and that I've worked even harder. But I also know there's more to it than just our elbow grease. Looking at him, blonde, tall, muscular, handsome, it's easy to see that he'd been handed opportunities for reasons other than simply merit. Being a man in the Army, for one, had given him opportunities denied to others, to me, on the basis of something none of us could control. And I know I've had unfair advantages too, which were completely separated from all my hardships, from how hard I've had to work. Finally, I have a term for what I've been seeking to put my fingers on for 11 years. Why I was given so many chances in this country. Why I was always treated so much better than I thought I deserved. It's also why people seem so upset when I turn out to be different than they expected. When I don't meekly play the role of the WASP girl they were expecting. Why they are so confused when they realize my identity is way more complicated than that. In this moment, I know deep, deep down, in places I'd never had the language to acknowledge before, that if I had looked or sounded as Brazilian as I sometimes feel I am, if my skin had been olive-toned like my Hungarian father instead of the snow white of my Slovakian mother, or if I had been the shape and color of my childhood best friend, Michaela, that I would have been treated much, much differently. Looking back, I can see in an instant that has always been true, since the day I'd set foot in America, all dazed and confused. I'd struggled, yes. But when I pulled myself up by those bootlaces, people were standing there, holding the door open for me. Nobody was trying to shut it in my face or bar me from advancing. I know that plenty of other people, like my friend Nina, like my first boyfriend Greg, probably couldn't say the same. I scan other faces in the crowd, the Lieutenant Mafia and the soldiers who work for me, a group of people I'd started to trust with some of my stories. I can tell that they all expect me to agree with Andrew, to affirm that white privilege couldn't possibly exist, because here I am, the least privileged person among them, someone who came from the hardest things they could imagine and became a great success, a captain in the United States Army, respected, maybe even loved by my peers and soldiers. But as nice as that idea sounds, I'd worked for everything I had, that I'd been given nothing, I know it for the lie it is. No, I'm sorry, I finally say in reply. I'm not familiar with white privilege as a term, so I'll definitely be doing more research. But I can list at least 10 times that my life has been easier than it would have been because I'm a pretty white girl. And like all truths, this one is complicated. My life has also been hard in other ways because of the same thing. But now, despite war and danger and tragedy, Despite being in one of the hardest situations of my life, the difficulty and the struggle is somehow easier to bear because I'm understanding more of the world around me. Tom and I have become a team, surviving a hard deployment with stolen moments, taking the time to build a bond so strong that even calamity can't shake us. And it tries. Months later at our wedding, that's where my snippet will end. So, this whole book came about because I got some life-changing information as I was publishing Uncultured. And I realized how close I maybe got to the dark side. And I needed to write about that and work that out. So